Almost every individual that comes into my office asks that question. And you know, the answer is yes, of course, anything that you do relative to your credit is going to affect your credit history. But here's one way of looking at it. Most of my clients, particularly those who do Chapter 7 filings, find that their credit history, their credit score actually improves as little as 1 year after the bankruptcy discharge. So bankruptcy discharge approximately 4 to 6 months after you file your case. So think of it this way, 1.5 years, the majority of people have a higher credit score 1.5 years after they file bankruptcy than the day they filed bankruptcy. And there's some reasons for that. First of all, a lot of times the reason you file is because you have a lot of debt, and the debt you have is crippling. Also, keep in mind that the debt you have will negatively affect your credit score. So if you have $80,000 worth of credit cards, you file bankruptcy, now that portion of your credit score, which is about 1/3, by the way, about 1/3 of your score is based on what you owe and what you owe relative to your history and what you owe relative to your limits. So if you have $80,000 worth of credit lines and your balance is $80,000, that's a big negative on your credit score. So the day that you get your discharge, your balance goes to 0. So that 1/3 of your credit score improves. Now there's another approximate 1/3 of your credit score analysis that is your payment history. Now that normally takes some time to heal, but that healing period is usually 18 to 24 months. So when you file a bankruptcy, it's a negative because that's a bad payment history, but you probably already had a bad payment history before. And in a short time, you can repair that by establishing new credit and by stopping the late payments from reporting on your credit report. Now there's another 1/3 of your credit history which is based on your overall history. So this is how long have you had credit. That's why generally older people tend to have higher scores. And things like have you had installment lines, revolving lines, have you had a mortgage, have you had car loans? And there's one little small sliver of that sometimes people get a little caught up with is inquiries, which is a very small, very short-term factor. But that 1/3 of your credit score that's determined by your history and your overall profile isn't going to be affected whether you file bankruptcy, you don't file bankruptcy, you pay your bills, you don't pay your bills, you have high balances or you don't have high balances, because that 1/3 is historical. But 2/3 of it, as we talked about earlier, will be affected, part of it positive, part of it negative. One other point on this I might mention to people, I used to be an underwriter of unsecured lines of credit way back in the 80s. And back in those days, we didn't use credit scoring. We actually analyzed credit with our brain. And I developed a matrix so we could analyze this, and we would look at how long people had had credit and what their balances were, how many lines they had, and what the trends were. And then we'd look at it and we'd say, oh, there's a bankruptcy. And that shows up for 7 years at that time. And that was a bigger negative in those days. Now, the modern trend is that credit scoring is the driving factor in what is your so-called credit worthiness.